We have quite an evening tonight. And it's wonderful to have this crowd of people in the room. It's wonderful to have everyone online. I want to acknowledge that we are gathering on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and that our hosting is through the lands of the territory of the Lenni Lenape people in New Jersey. Welcome to Fairleigh Dickinson University. We are an American private nonprofit liberal arts college, but we've been here in Vancouver for 16 years, and we are delighted to be hosting Poets Corner. We've been doing literary events for about 16 years here, and it's wonderful to have our speakers tonight. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first featured speaker for the evening. In particular, because the last time I had hair long enough to tie back was 31 years ago, when I was starting first year as an undergraduate student at Simon Fraser University. And the first textbook I bought was 20th Century Poetry and Poetics by Gary Geddes, edited by Gary Geddes. And he is here to read for us tonight, and it brings me great pleasure. Oh, Derek's first? Derek is first. I'm sorry, I just had you in different order on the page. Derek's okay too. Well, let's forget about the hair thing, you know. I will be much closer to you in a very few years. So, Derek Beaulieu is the author of 26 books of poetry, conceptual fiction, critical writing, as well as over 200 chapbooks and 6 edited volumes. This is going to be hard to do in like one breath. His work is consistently praised as some of the most radical and challenging in contemporary Canadian writing. Beaulieu was Calgary's Poet Laureate from 2014 to 2016 and is currently Banff's Poet Laureate from 2022 to 2024, and was named the only celebrated alumnus from the literature and creative writing at the University of Calgary. The next part kind of matters. In 2022, he received the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal, which stated, quote, Derek Beaulieu not only constitutes one of the most innovative of all authors in Canada, but he has committed himself to service on behalf of others, providing leadership in the arts throughout his career and promoting the poetic merits of Canada to audiences around the world. What I'll say next only shows the truth in that assessment. In 2012, Book Thug published his critical edition, co-edited with Gregory Betts, of Bill Bissett's seminal 1972 volume of experimental commentary, Rush, What a Fucking Theory. In 2013, Wilfrid Laurier University Press published Writing Surfaces, Selective Fiction of John Riddell, co-edited with Laurie Emerson, whose husband is also quite a fine scholar of fantasy literature. And they're lovely people. And in 2018, he edited Nights on Prose Mountain, the collected fiction of B.P. Nichol. In 2005, he brought out Shift and Switch New Canadian Poetry, co-edited with Angela Rawlings and Jason Christie, followed in 2016 by the release of Calgary Renaissance, co-edited with Rob McClelland, who was with us just earlier this season. In other words, wherever you go in Canadian poetry, you will find people helped and supported. Since 2018, Derek has been the Director of Literary Arts at the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity, Canada's foremost arts space, dedicated to the mentorship and education of arts and culture workers internationally. And personally, I can't think of anyone more suited for that role. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. I turn over the floor to you.
And I didn't edit 20th Century Poetry and Poetics, but we do have, it's a real pleasure to be sharing the mic with Gary and with all of the readers as part of the open mic. It takes a lot of courage to stand up here, so thank you all. I'm going to start with a short piece of prose and then a short reading from Surface Tension, my latest book, which is out from Coach House Books. The prose is called I submitted it to Anthruster Press with the title Post Hoc Ergo Proctor Hoc, and they accepted the manuscript and then asked if they could change the title to just the smiley face emoticon. So, in 2015, NASA and ESA scientists, when examining the results transmitted from the Hubble Space Telescope, met the gaze of something unexpected. Albert Einstein proposed a century ago, as part of his theory of relativity, that gravity could bend light. He continued to theorize that an optical illusion would result when a massive object acts like a lens. bending light to curve in a partial or full circle. Galaxy clusters SDSS J1038 and 4849 glow orange, perched over a curve caused by gravitational lensing, the process where light is bent and distorted into what is now known as an Einstein ring. This illusion creates an arc under the two orange galaxial glimmers, two dots and an arc, an intergalactic smiley face. 3 billion light years in the making, two dots and a line, dit, dit, da. In Morse code, two dits and a da encodes the letter U, and SDS J1038 and 4849, with their two dots and a line, two dits and a da, arranged in a smiley face, reaches out across the galaxies to send a message calling to you. In the summer of 1963, astronaut Gordon Cooper was working to answer that call. He was on board the Mercury Atlas 9 rocket, the final manned space mission of the US Mercury project, circling the Earth 22 times before splashing down in the Pacific Ocean. That same season, 26-year-old Valentina Tereshkova became the first woman to travel in space aboard Vostok 6, while Buddhist monk Thich Quan Duc immolated himself on a street in Saigon, and mourners passed Medgar Evers' open casket in Jackson, Mississippi. In the faces of these crises, and in response to plummeting employee morale, State Mutual Life Assurance Company commissioned designer Harvey Ball to design an image which might distract disgruntled employees from the pressures of contemporary life. Ball, who served in the US Army at the Battle of Okinawa, 27 years in the National Guard, and eventually retired as a full colonel, was no doubt fluent in the use of Morse code, and all too aware of the challenges of improving morale. He drew two off-center dots and an arc and created the smiley face on a bright yellow background. Ball created the design in 10 minutes and was paid $45. He did not copyright his design. By mid-November that same year, President Kennedy was dead. In 1970, as Apollo 11 astronauts transmit, "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here," and as US troops expand their hostilities by invading Cambodia, Philadelphia brothers Bernard and Murray Spain expand upon Colonel Ball's image by adding the mollifying soporific, "Have a nice day." In 1972, the year that Nixon opens dialogue with China, the Spain brothers sell 50 million yellow smiley face buttons and badges. As Eugene Cernan becomes the last man to ever walk on the surface of the moon, France's Franklin Loufrani asserts copyright on Ball's smiley face design for his work in the Good News section of François newspaper. Once again, the hued face of tranquilizing calm is capitalized in support of subduing citizens. Loufrani's Smiley World becomes an international business, marketing to the masses overseas. Prez, the comic book teenage nominee for US president, written and drawn by Jerry Garanetti, who served in the US Navy, and Joe Simon, who served in the US Coast Guard and created Captain America, struggled in the pages of his short-lived comic to convince the establishment the teenage president would be good for his country. He was consistently thwarted by Boss Smiley, the head of the ultra-right-wing militia, who literally had a giant yellow smiley button for a head and a permanent empty smile plastered on his face. The comedian, the gun-toting masochistic vigilante of Alan Moore's The Watchmen, plummets to his death during the apocalyptic vision of Nixon's never-ending presidency. His blood smears against the smiley face button, one of the 50 million buttons pinned on 50 million chests. In 1977, as New York City is engulfed in darkness and SETI receives the wow signal from deep space, the smiley face appears as sleeve illustration for the UK vinyl release of the Talking Heads' Psycho Killer. 2 years later, as a Soviet biowarfare laboratory accidentally releases airborne anthrax spores, killing 66 people and unknown herds of livestock, the smiley face illustrates the Nuremberg-style rallies for the dead Kennedys as they yell the lyrics, "You will jog for the master race and always wear the smiley face." An anonymous graffiti artist Banksy creates a series of murals which appear overnight without witness or evidence. His murals feature the depiction of the Grim Reaper, whose hooded visage has been replaced by the vacuous yellow disc of a smiley face. New York City detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte allege that the deaths of 45 young men across 11 states were the victims of the smiley face gang. They claim the gang's existence after it was made public that the police had discovered smiley face graffiti near locations where the bodies were found. The response of law enforcement investigators and other experts has been largely skeptical. Grunge band Nirvana swerves the smiley face for their corporate rock whores t-shirt. There are two suggestions as to the origins of that design. Perhaps it was stolen from the signage and "Have an erotic day" slogan of the now defunct Seattle strip club, The Lusty Lady. Perhaps it was based on a sketch by Kurt Cobain of Axl Rose trolling the Guns N' Roses frontman. The slogan on the back of the t-shirt, "Flower sniffing, petty kitten, baby kissing corporate rock whores," could be a jibe at Rose's expense, although it may have been Nirvana taking ownership of their own status as corporate sellouts. As personal computers and programmers expand their vocabulary to include non-alphabetic characters, they strive to include a typable smiley face. They encode the smiley face's dit-dit-da as U263A. The galaxial greeting continues to transmit through the keys that we type. In 1994, Nirvana's Kurt Cobain commits suicide days after sharing an airplane flight with Guns N' Roses' Duff McKagan. The same year, the film Forrest Gump depicts a clueless moron who sleepwalks through the coincidence of presence at many of the key moments of American history and creates the smiley face logo when he wipes mud from his face onto a yellow t-shirt. American corporate giant Walmart, one of the biggest employers in the world, incorporated the smiley face into its marketing scheme, using Colonel Ball's soporific to sell discount goods to suburbanites. As NASA launches the New Horizons space probe to Pluto, Walmart sues to wrest control of the copyright of the smiley face away from the Lufrani's Smiley World Corporation. Walmart lost. Have a nice day. So my latest book is called Surface Tension. It's published by Coach House Books. It's available over at the table. It's a book of concrete poems, which I don't generally read. They look like that. I think the camera's over there. They look like that. But the poems are interspersed with a series of statements about contemporary poetics. So the first chapter is called Madge, You're Soaking in It. Finally, somebody gets that reference. At its core, Surface Tension holds a series of delicate, balanced poems, each symmetrical, palindromic, and made by hand using Letraset. A graphic designer's tool, Letraset, which standardizes typefaces across advertising platforms in an idealistic 1950s, 60s aesthetic of sales copy and purchasing power, foregrounds a clean design, a logical, controllable narrative of graphic beauty and heroic lyricism. Surface Tension creates landscapes from the remnants of advertising. Letraset, for instance, now is mostly used by scrapbookers and hobbyists. A pastoral space of deep ink pools where even the language itself is an oily sheen on the surface of writing. Just as logos continuously wash over us, let poetry do the same, part of the written landscape we occupy. These reflections and distortions work to keep concrete current in flow, a fluidity refusing to solidify around power. The most representative and perhaps the most exciting art form of our age is the advertising logo. Why not create a logo advertising modern poetry, modern art? Remarkable words with letters bigger than aqueducts, ringed with quicksilver, flamboyant and shocking, like advertising. Almost all of these statements have been stolen, swiped, or borrowed off the internet. stolen, swiped, or borrowed, just depending on how you see the politics of that. So they're created from the Greek chorus that is the internet. Form is never more than an extension of content. Photocopiers don't just reproduce invoices and documents, they introduce beauty and sway, noise and reverb. Literature is not craftsmanship, but an industrial process where the poem is a prototype rather than artistry. The contemporary poem is an understanding of juxtaposition. It focuses on the arrangement of letters and material. Headlines, slogans, groups of sounds and letters give rise to forms that can be models for a new poetry, just waiting to be taken up for use. If the poem is a new product in a world flooded with new products, then it must partake of the nature of the world that created it. When most of the language we consume is non-poetic, should poetry not attempt to poetically intervene within those spaces that are not traditionally poetic? Poetry can fully embrace the plasticized space of graphics and glyphs, pixels and projections. Write not just in the margins, but in the kerning. Imagine a poetry that learns from the internet, learns from mass media, and starts to assume different forms of distribution. The website, the tweet, the post, the logo, the advertisement, the targeted ad. Poets don't own their work. They just borrow it from the dictionary.
Derek?
Yes?
We've had a request from the Zoom people. Could you hold up one of your concrete poems for a little bit longer toward the screen?
I can. Towards the screen.
Yeah, come a little, yeah, that's great.
There we go. There we go. All that signifies can be sold. Poetry, like advertising, is anything you can get away with. Readability is key. Like a logo, a poem should be instantly recognizable. Poetry here endeavors to render all language into poetic icons, much like everyone can understand the meaning of a folder icon on the computer screen. While graphic design, advertising, and contemporary design culture expand to redefine and rewrite how we understand communication, poetry struggles against becoming ensconced in the traditional. The McDonald's golden arches, the Nike swoosh, and the Apple logo best represent the aims of contemporary poets, to me. Like logos for the corporate sponsors of Jorge Luis Borges' Library of Babel, these poems use the particles of language to represent and promote goods and corporations just out of reach. Poems are the street signs, the signage, the advertising logos for the shops and corporations that are in our dreams. How far away from poetry can we get and still be reading and writing poetry? Moments of poetic nostalgia for the signposts of a non-existent past. Make it simple, make it memorable, make it inviting to look at. A poetry of difference, chance, and eruption. You complain that this stuff is not written in English. It's not written at all. It is not to be read, or rather it's not only to be read. It is to be looked at and listened to. Language to be looked at and or things to be read. Type is what meaning looks like. The logic of the symmetries is a closed case of beauty, and these distortions present not just a puddle, but an ocean, a flowing openness of poetic possibility where the format and authority of letters and clockwork slide away to present a more liquid, a more natural, a more warm and welcoming, unmoored form of poetic. They're not stains, they're pools, there's space here, active surfaces, ponds with depth. Poems are not just rarefied jewels, carefully chiseled for a bespoke audience. They are the nuts and bolts, factory made, shifting from use to use. They are airport signs manufactured in bulk. They are silk screens awaiting t-shirts. It is the realization that the usages of language and poetry of the traditional type are not keeping pace with the live processes of language and rapid methods of communication at work in the contemporary world. Writing is not about something, it is that something itself. Poetry here is concerned with being an object to be perceived rather than read. The content of the poem is non-literary, but completely recognizable. These poems begin ideally in recognition. As soon as we see them, We know a particular object is in question because only that object has just this and no other emblem. A poem should not mean. The poem is the concentration upon the physical material which the poem or text is made. Emotions and ideas are not physical material. Poems that refold the old, retrieved from a nowhere cultural memory, fitfully nostalgic for an ethereal, ephemeral moment. Poems made of letters that combine, like so many pieces of orphaned Lego, to form previously unexpected constructions, not at all resembling the images on the packaging. Poets owe nothing to poetry, least of all, deference. Every page should explode because of its staggering absurdity, the enthusiasm of its principles, or its topography. Poetry belongs to the world of appearances, not to that of actual use. Poems that refuse linearity in favor of the momentary. A poem should not mean, but be. Thank you very much.